Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the specific concern of food importers in Britain regarding Brexit systems and how we're likely to be hit with a double whammy of food shortages if the government don't start taking things seriously. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So at the moment, it's all fairly easy. We produce about 50% of the food that we consume. Although some of the food that is produced, if it uses ingredients that we import from elsewhere, so the actual figure arguably is much less. But 30% of imports come from the EU and then 20% come from non-EU countries, some of whom have trade agreements, in fact many of whom have trade agreements with the EU, which means that when we leave the transition period, it's not just imports from the EU that become more difficult, but imports from lots of those other countries as well. Now, from January the 1st, 2021, of course, it is going to become much less easy. As seems likely at the moment, we're going to leave the transition period without any real trade agreement at all. Importing food from the EU, as well as those other countries, becomes much more challenging. And the British Retail Consortium were discussing the extra Brexit bureaucracy that will come with this. So what you'd have to do as an importer is you'd have to fill in VAT and customs forms. Then you'd have to fill in freight forms, health and veterinary forms, export health certificates, exit and entry declarations, and safety and security forms. And not only will you need as a business the staff to be able to sort out this documentation, and they're going to need training in good time as well, which is difficult even if your business can do that. That's going to push up the price of the food for a large business. And for a smaller group, it's going to drive them out of business because, of course, they won't be able to take on all the staff necessary, much less train them. But it's all going to need to be checked too, so that's where the government would come in. Cue the massively expanded force and facilities that you need to do this at our ports that we don't have, that we haven't even started. No work has begun on expanding our customs declaration facilities or, the staff needed to do that or training them. So that is, of course, going to mean massive shortages of food. We're not even talking about the days of tailbacks at Dover. I mean, that is going to happen. With food spoils. It won't get through late and at a higher cost because of the extra transport cost. It won't get through at all. There'll be no point in even trying to send it. Now, I've already mentioned that Michael Gove said that the systems that we are getting ready for dealing with the customs needed won't be ready until 2025. But, Mr. Gove, we're going to need them in 2021. Yeah, but they're not going to be ready till 2025. So what we're going to do for the 4+ years that we're waiting around? They don't know. No, they don't. So retailers say they need the following. First of all, no tariffs. They need a deal that means no tariffs. Boris Johnson has ruled that out. 2, they need coordination on VAT and excise procedures. Well, time's ticking away. The government haven't even got proposals for that, let alone any beginnings of implementation. I'm sure if you ask them, they will say, well, we can't have these systems because we don't know what deal we're going to end up with. That is of no use to the importers when you end up with no deal. 3, advanced information on new checks. In other words, when new checks are going to come online that you're going to have to do, they need to know about them well in advance. Like I say, they need to be able to hire and train staff to be able to cope with them. Again, government has no plan for this. 4, they need a timely construction of infrastructure at the ports. Not even begun. No chance of being ready for the end of this year, even if you were to send the whole cabinet down to Dover right now with a load of shovels and a lorry full of cement. There is no way, even if they began immediately, obviously you wouldn't get them to do it, that it could possibly be ready by the end of the year. The civil service was saying this a long time ago. You need to start preparing this now. And the government would no. Because the government didn't believe that we would leave with no deal. That was madness. Then Boris Johnson came in and he said, oh, no, I'm fine with leaving with no deal, but didn't actually put the things in place to deal with no deal. So does that mean that over 40% of our food is now going to struggle to find its way onto the shelves next year? That 40% takes into account imports from the EU, as well as non-EU countries where we enjoy tariff-free trade at the moment. No, it's going to be more than that, because then we come into the difficulties of the 50% of food that we do produce. So as I mentioned earlier, some of that food is made from ingredients that we have to import from countries where we currently do enjoy free trade, so it's easy to get into the country. Comes from some distance away potentially, or may not, may come from the free trade area within Europe still. Now I don't know how much that is as a percentage, but just to highlight something, I remember when Boris Johnson was trying to say about the prospect of no deal, oh, you're still going to be able to have your Mars bars. And then ironically enough, a senior executive from Mars said, actually, you're not, because the stuff we use to make them comes from abroad. So obviously we don't need Mars bars, but there will be foods that we do still want. But then we come to the produce, the actual produce, the stuff we genuinely produce, you know, farming. Can't we just expand to produce more of our own crops? You know, get more fruit and vegetables grown in the country? No, the reverse actually. Now it was calculated, granted it was calculated that with a coordinated effort we could increase the level of our own farming and we may be able to produce 70% of the food that we consume, which is still a long way off the 100% that we want to consume right now. But the reality is we won't be able to increase. Well, first of all, there are no plans to expand farming anyway, so that's not going to happen. But it won't even be as much as 50,000. Bear in mind, crops need to be picked. Very famously, this is done by about 80,000 EU migrants a year. The government has a scheme apparently to try and attract 10,000, presumably bypassing their own shiny new immigration rules. And on that point, I will just add, you know, as I keep saying, these immigration rules, of course, sound absolutely terrible and they're going to affect every region in the country very negatively. But the Conservatives have done this before where they talk tough on immigration and then don't actually follow through on it because they allow all sorts of exceptions and things like that. I'm not ruling out them doing this. I'm not saying I think they will, because there is something different about Boris Johnson. He is a mad dog. He is actually insane enough to go through with this, as is Priti Patel. But we have to go by what they say they're going to do until evidence to the contrary emerges. And yeah, that is still going to leave us at least 70,000 workers short. No problem, the Brexiteers cry. We'll just use some of that 8.5 million people that the Home Secretary tells us is waiting in the wings. Except these are jobs that are never entirely filled even now. Farmers have been struggling to get foreign workers for years now, thanks to a number of factors. So British workers have had no problem getting that work. Not that they ever did. If they wanted it, it's there. So where are they? Why aren't these jobs right now, where there are shortages, being taken up by British workers? Well, I suppose there's a few reasons. I'm guessing that one of them would be that living in towns and cities and not so much rural farm locations is one big factor. Either way, there's no way to see how farmers are going to get the staff they need in order to get their produce to market. So that means we'll actually be effectively producing less. How could it be otherwise? No problem, they cry again. We'll just force the unemployed to take those jobs and get buses to take them to the farms if they don't live near them. Well, even if that's feasible, and I don't know how feasible it is to even make up any of that 70,000 shortfall, I have to say I do not believe there are 70,000 unemployed people around those very remote areas. I doubt there's even 70,000 people living in such areas. You've got the cost of that transport. You have to actually pay to bus them there, and the fact that those people won't actually do the same job. I mean, I saw a documentary a year or so ago, and it was on a farm that uses a lot of EU migrant labour. And they actually did. There was a documentary. They got a load of young, fit, teenage British workers to go and do it. They were rubbish, you know, and because they didn't have the right work ethic. They seemed nice enough, but they weren't able to keep up to the same levels of productivity of their European counterparts, which means you would need more of them. It means you need to pay more of them, all extra costs. And if you were to go along with this scheme, what you'd actually be doing, you'd not only have to employ way more British pickers, but if it's actually a reluctant slave force being bussed in every day, then compared to the hard-working European ones have been used to, not as productive, nowhere near as productive, in fact. And that all drives up the costs. And that is assuming that we're even able to openly bus in slaves to work our farms right away, or have the capacity to do it. As I say, it's no good if they live 20 miles away, or 30 miles away, or 40 miles away. I can't emphasise strongly enough, they don't build many farms in densely populated areas. It's all right saying we've got so many unemployed in the country. If the unemployed people are not where the jobs are, it's like you've got a lot of unemployment in the north of England, but that's not where the jobs are. The jobs are in the south of England. Getting people to the jobs is the difficulty, not having the people to do those jobs. So the result is going to be, if Boris Johnson carries on his current path, massive food shortages, undeniable food shortages, and increases in the prices of the foods we do have. So anyway, hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.